Welcome to another interview in Chicago Jewish Cafe. Today we have an honor and privilege to talk to Joshua Karlip, who is a professor of Jewish history at Yeshiva University. He also teaches at Fish Center of Holocaust Studies at Yeshiva University. And his latest critically acclaimed book is The Tragedy of the Generation, The Rise and Fall of Jewish Nationalism in Eastern Europe, the link to which we're going to place, and you can find below this video. It will take you to Amazon. Professor Karlip's current book project, Rabbis in the Land of Atheism, The Struggle to Save Judaism in Bolshevik Russia, tells a story, an untold story of rabbinic resistance to the Soviet Union's war on religion. The main reason, the primary reason that I invited Joshua, Professor Karlip, for this interview is because of his article in the tablet. The article is titled "The Flight from Jewish Peoplehood: From the Soviet Yiddishists of the 1920s to the American Jewish Studies departments of today. Blaming Jews for anti-Semitism does not end well." Joshua, what is it all about?
Thank you very much, Alex, for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. What it's about is that this has been a process that I've noticed has been going on for the last several years, but it really accelerated over the last month with the latest Hamas war on Israel and the response of a group of Jewish studies professors, Jewish studies and Israel studies professors, organized here in America, a few signing from abroad, writing a statement called, quote, Statement on Israel-Palestine, that really adopted, from my perspective, the Palestinian narrative on the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict from 1948, and actually adopted the Hamas narrative, in my opinion, of the latest war of the last month.
Why? I'm not asking the names. I mean, I think that you indicated there's a link to their declaration of some of them on the tablet, if I remember, but how many of these people, and what does it mean, the flight from Jewish peoplehood? What?
Okay, so first of all, let me just say something about the statement. I didn't directly refer to it by name in the article, although I quoted it at one point. They speak about Israel as a country that was born in colonialism, a country that practices Jewish supremacy, a Jewish supremacy that is unsustainable and that must end. Even when they have some nice things to say about Israeli culture, they then go on to say all of this Israeli culture, politics, society has taken place on land that was confiscated from the Palestinians who were dispossessed and whom the Israelis did not let return. So basically what they're doing, this is not about criticizing a government policy. This is not about criticizing Netanyahu or any other government or the settlements or any other project. This is about delegitimizing Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people.
Why would they do something like this? I mean, I know that anti-Semites do it routinely. Although, in 19th century, early 20th century, they did not. They were telling Jews to go to Palestine. But after we got there, now they tell us to get out of Palestine, whatever that means, And so why would those supposedly nominally Jewish Jews, that are scholars, why would they take position of enemies of our people?
And yes, and what hurt me so much was that this was not a statement from non-involved Jews. This was a statement from Jewish studies scholars at universities throughout America, some of the leading universities. And why would they do it? So that's what I probed in my essay. And in my research, I had the opportunity to study the Soviet Yiddishist experiment. For those who don't know, the Lenin and the Bolshevik Party did not view the Jews as a nation. They viewed them simply as a caste that was destined to assimilate into the general proletariat. But in order to win over the Jewish proletariat, the Yiddish-speaking masses, to Bolshevism in the aftermath of the Russian Civil War, at the beginning of the Soviet Union in the early 20s, Lenin created a commissariat of Jewish affairs, and he created the Yevsektia. This was the Jewish section of the Communist Party. And the purpose of these organizations, of these institutions, was to spread Yiddish culture. The term was Soviet in national informed Soviet in content to the Yiddish-speaking Jews. In the process, the Yevsektia went
not to Hebrew-speaking Jews, right? Not Hebrew.
Not Hebrew, no. So in what I wanted to say is, in the process, the Yevsektia went with a vengeance, went after Jewish religion. They were responsible for shutting down thousands of synagogues and thousands of chadarim, thousands of traditional Jewish schools and yeshivas. They would inform the government, they would inform on somebody who performed a brit milah for their son. Historians today realize that the Soviet government in the early 20s had a lot more on their mind than a few shuls, a few, beis medrash, a cheder. They had to rebuild the whole country after 7 years of war. But the Yevsektia got ahead of the government and was more anti-Zionist and more anti-Judaism than the government was.
They were committed anti-Jewish Jews, right?
Exactly. And the question is why? And many historians believe that one of the motivations was that these members of the Yevsektia, who were they? They were former Bundists. They were former socialist Zionists and other groups that merged socialism and Jewish nationalism. They were treif. They were non-kosher in the eyes of the Bolsheviks. So in order to show how much they repented for their previous sin of nationalism, they had to become, as the expression goes, more Catholic than the Pope. They had to be more Bolshevik than the Bolsheviks. And so they went with a passion. They went after everything that they were trying to get away from. They also were hoping that if they showed the Bolsheviks how dedicated they were to their ideology, the Bolsheviks would give them some freedom to create their own Yiddish culture in the Soviet Union. But of course, it didn't work out that way because it was a short-lived phenomenon. By 1930, the Yevsektia was liquidated. And by the mid-1930s, especially 1936, 1937, now under Stalin, there was a wave of purges. And many were sent to gulags and killed then. Those who were killed then were killed in the later purges of 1948 to 1952. And they were accused of the very same thing that they persecuted other Jews for, being Jewish nationalists and chauvinists. And so I looked at this phenomenon and I said, we have a parallel. We have a parallel here. We have similarly many Jewish studies professors who have a cloud of suspicion over them for being Jewish and openly Jewish on campus and teaching Jewish studies on campus, which is not one of the politically, to say politically correct groups.
Did you say we have had such professors?
Excuse me?
Did you say we have had such professors? We had them for a long time until now? What?
No, I said that I saw a parallel between the Yevsektia and the Jewish studies professors today. We always had a few, but it has mushroomed and grown in the last matter of months. Just to give you an example, and I quote this in the article. In 2017, I believe it was, maybe it was 2016 or 2017, two American Jewish historians, both prominent, wrote an op-ed in Haaretz. And the op-ed was entitled, "We are American Jewish historians, that's why we've left our Zionism behind." And in it, they say—
What were their names?
Chasya Diner and Marjorie Feld, I believe, yes, and Marjorie Feld. Chasya Diner is a professor at New York University. Very distinguished, has published a long record of publication. And what she says is that she grew up a labor Zionist, and she was very proud of being Zionist. And as she has developed as a historian of America, she now comes to see Israel as a colonialist enterprise. The law of return is racist. She wants Israel to be a democracy, but not a Jewish nation state. And she abhors, she used the term, she abhors going to Israel. She abhors support for Israel in the Jewish community. And although she does not, she also says she abhors terrorism. She understands terrorism as the weapon of the oppressed. So
she understands terrorism against Jews.
Terrorism against Jews, yes.
Yeah, but any attempt of Jews to defend themselves physically and violently, she does not understand.
That she doesn't understand, yes. And anyway, another professor, very distinguished, Jonathan Sarna at Brandeis University of American Jewish History, wrote a piece back. I believe it was also in Haaretz, in which he said, how could it be that we have two very sophisticated historians who have written in their field, they have written extremely sophisticated material. And when it comes to Israel, they are demonizing Israel and regurgitating, this I think is the term he used, basically regurgitating propaganda against Israel. And so this is what he said. Now, he also said in his response, he believes that these two women are outliers. This Chasya Diner and Marjorie Feld are outliers, that this is not the way most American Jews feel. Fast forward 4 years, and now we have a statement that's signed by dozens of Jewish studies professors that basically says the same thing that she did. Israel is a colonialist enterprise that was based on land acquisition. Israel dispossessed the Palestinians. Israel practices, now we have a new term, Israel practices Jewish supremacy. Now, why has it gotten so much worse in the last year? Because since the murder of George Floyd 1 year ago, and which was a terrible murder, and the riots at the time, and what's called the racial reckoning in this country, there has been a rise in what's called intersectionalism, which is a belief that every oppressed group is related to one another. The oppression of every group is related to every other group. So therefore, immediately in the midst of these riots, you had a rise in anti-Israel sentiment and anti-Jewish violence in the name of anti-Israel sentiment. You had vandalism of a synagogue in Los Angeles that said, I think, "Free Palestine," and at the same time, a Jewish neighborhood was looted, and so.
So all of these oppressed groups selected as their target another group that is us, the Jews, and they decided that we're appropriate target for their venom.
Yeah. Well, I would say that I just want to be careful and to say that this is not coming from everybody within these movements. There are, Black Lives Matter is a umbrella organization, so there are voices there that are not engaging in this, but there are also many voices that are engaged.
But the founding members, what's her name? Forgot her name. She also 5 years ago, 6 years ago at Harvard University declared that we must end this imperialist project called Israel. Yeah. Otherwise, we are doomed. I do not know who she means by we and why she's so scared.
Yeah, and also the Black Lives Matter as an organization issued a statement in solidarity with the Palestinians, in solidarity with the people of Gaza in the midst of the latest war of Hamas on Israel. Yes, so I just wanted to nuance it to say it's not everybody. There are people who this is maybe the leadership, but there are people marching with them. Let's say the rank and file who are marching with them because they're concerned for their own, their community.
What about these? Look at this. We know from Pew survey that something like 70 or 80% of Jews in the United States support Israel very much so. Yeah. But it bothers me that there's 20%, even according to the survey, that don't support. And among those 20, probably 10 actively hate Israel because they hate themselves as Jews.
Yes, they're calling for 10% of Jews, according to the latest Pew study, are calling for BDS.
No kidding, 10%. So 10%. I was not far off.
You were right, 100% right. And I would suggest to you that the percentage is much higher amongst the Jewish academics, amongst those, ironically enough, in Jewish studies. Now,
why would that be?
Yeah, well, because these intersectional myths are very widespread in academia today. This notion that every oppressed group is related to every other oppressed group. So therefore, if there's white supremacy in America, then there must be, look how quickly it morphed from white supremacy to Jewish supremacy. This is the term that they're using today.
Well, because it's terrifying to go against white supremacy. It's much easier, and one can feel himself or herself much braver to go against supremacy of 0.1% of humanity.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the other thing I wanted to say is that this type of thinking is classic, what's referred to as inversion thinking, because the victim becomes the victimizer, and everything is in the reverse. There's in Megillat Esther, we say v'nahafochu, everything turned around. This is in Yiddish. I don't know if you know Yiddish. There's a.
I know 4 words.
And
you do not want to hear them.
I'm afraid to ask you which words. Yeah. So there's an expression to say backwards. Say Moshe Kapoyer. It's just a meaningless expression, but it means it backwards. Like someone does something. So their thinking is Moshe Kapoyer. The aggressor, Hamas, becomes the victim, and the victim, the Israelis, become the aggressor, and truth doesn't matter. Truth doesn't matter. And they speak in this statement about the dispossession of the Palestinians
But just this is nothing new, for a long time, Christians, accuse Jews of eating the blood of their children, while they themselves every Sunday eat the blood of a Jew.
Right, at least symbolically, right?
No. What's his name? One of the founders of Christian Church, John
Chrysostom, yeah.
Yeah, said that anybody who says that this is symbolically goes directly to hell.
Right, this is
because there's a mystery of transformation of wine into a true blood of Jesus.
Yeah, but what I want to tell you is as follows. When I see anti-Israel statements that are also deeply anti-Semitic coming from non-Jews, it bothers me. But when I see it coming from Jews, and especially from Jewish studies professors, Jewish historians, that sickens me, because to turn against Jews, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're anything, is no news. It's an old story. But for Jews, and especially Jewish scholars, scholars supposedly of the Jewish experience, to turn against their own people is to me is mind-boggling. But again, it's also not new, because we've had a long history of Jews who have gone to the enemy camp. We have a history of Jews who have converted to Christianity and joined the church to persecute the Jews. We had the Yevsektia, as I mentioned, that persecuted Jewish religion and Zionism more than the Soviet government. So in a sense, it's also nothing new, but it is emotionally very.
Soviet government on its own would never dare to do things to Jews the way they actually have done without Yevsektia.
That's right. That's right. In fact, we know that the Yevsektia, we talk now about the vaccine. We are thinking about the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. The Yevsektia was the vaccine against the charge of anti-Semitism for the Soviet government, because the Soviet government needed to distance itself from the anti-Semitism of the Tsarist government that came before it. The Tsarist government was notoriously anti-Semitic. The Soviet government had to say, we are anti-Semitic. So if that's the case, how can we go after Jewish religion? How can we? Well, if the Yevsektia is doing it, then it's not us, it's them. They're doing it.
We need nominal Jews to stand up for us and tell everybody that we're not anti-Semitic. And this is what these nominal Jews in the United States, in academia, are doing for anti-Semites.
Right. Now the question is, so why are they doing it? So I want to tell you what a colleague of mine, and I can't mention his name because he asked for anonymity. A colleague of mine at a secular university said, to be a Jewish studies professor today on a campus in America is to be under a cloud of suspicion of being a Zionist, of being associated with Israel. So when these professors are writing and signing declarations, distancing themselves from Israel, what they're doing is protecting themselves. They're protecting themselves, and they're inoculating themselves against this hatred, this anti-Semitic hatred that's coming against Israel, Jews, in the name of anti-Israel, in the name of anti-Zionism. If you look at this statement that came out, the majority of the signers were assistant professors. Now, what does this tell us? Well, it tells us, number one, we know the younger people get in general, the younger American Jews get in general, the less pro-Israel they are. But what it tells us more than that is that the people who are signing it the most are the people who are fearful of their jobs. An assistant professor doesn't have tenure, right? What happens? I have colleagues from all over the country who've been writing us, and they've asked us, and they've written to Yeshiva University, professors at Yeshiva University, because we are one of the last Zionist institutions of academia in the United States. And they've written to us, and they tell us of the tremendous pressure that they're under to sign these statements. Not just this statement, but statements organized by their departments. Let's say you have a professor of Israel studies who is in the Middle Eastern department. So the Middle Eastern department writes a statement against Israel, and they come to the Jewish professor of Israel studies, and they asked him to sign it. Now, imagine if you are an assistant professor who doesn't have tenure, you're coming up for tenure. You think to yourself, what are the consequences if I don't sign this letter? You know, and I think that's what's going on. That is what's going on. That's what people have told me is going on.
And probably once they act, at least make one step as a coward in that respect, then as people who do not want to feel that they're cowards, they rapidly find some justifications, especially justice, peace,
That's
no
right.
occupation, etc., etc.
That's right.
No?
100%, 100%, 100%. So I believe that some of them who wrote it, who signed it, believe it, and others are signing out of fear, out of, as you said, out of fear for their own careers, out of fear for their own standing.
But once they do something like this out of fear, a person does not like to say, I did it out of fear. Then what is it? Especially if I'm very smart, I wrote some papers, I authored some books, I need to justify my action, as good. In the Soviet Union, some of the worst acts of cowardice, social cowardice, have been committed by Jews when Soviet society allowed Jews to be publicly exhibited as Jews.
That's right. That's what in my article I speak about a Yiddishist named Nochem Stiff. Stiff had been a great scholar. Stiff had been a great Jewish nationalist. And he had started off, I believe, as a Zionist, then he became a diaspora nationalist, but he had been a proud Jew, and he actually, it was his idea to found YIVO, which was the Yiddish Scientific Institute. But as YIVO was starting in 1925, he accepted a position at the Ukrainian National Academy of Sciences in Kiev. Why did he do it? He did it because he wanted to eat. And he had been starving, he had been unemployed as a scholar. The Soviet Union was creating what we would call Jewish studies departments. You're studying Yiddish and along.
Well, in 25, he could not imagine what was going to follow within 5 to 10 years.
100%, absolutely. But as soon as he got to the Soviet Union, he started declaring the military occupation of the Yiddish language by Hebrew. And Hebrew has to be expunged.
What do you mean? Military occupation of Yiddish by Hebrew?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
What does it mean?
What it means is that Yiddish, according to this ideology, is an inherently secular language. And the Hebrew parts in it, the Hebrew, what we would call the Lashon Kodesh Dikaverter, the Hebrew words in it, emes,
language of Hebrew, of Torah.
All the words of Torah are an occupation from the bourgeois clerical class, forcing its way into what otherwise would be a secular language.
Basically creating an attempt to create a Jewish community without God whatsoever.
Without God and without the Jewish people. And Zelig Kalmanovich, the one I write about, who hated Bolshevism, fled the Soviet Union at the first opportunity, lived in independent Lithuania and then in Vilna, which was part of Poland at the time and became part of YIVO. He said it's just the opposite. He said Yiddish was born with Hebrew, the Hebrew of the Torah, and the Judeo-Aramaic of the Talmud, and with the Jewish people. And he said that the Soviet Yiddishists understand that, and that's what they're going after. They're going after that to kill the connection to the Jewish people and to kill the connection to the religious tradition. Because once you take the Hebrew out, you've taken the soul. You've taken the soul out. And I see parallels. I see very strong parallels today. Very strong parallels today.
So now, what can be done about this trend, or how Jews who want to be Jews should react to this trend? I mean, because I have to say that this is a very, very dangerous development. It's an indication of profound shift within American society. It's not just simply universities, it's American society.
Yes, I would say 100%. Now, there are two issues. Number one is that, yes, you're right. This is more pronounced in the academy than it is in the general society. But if the past is a guide, and I believe it is, we know that what is in the academy today will be mainstream tomorrow. Now,
Commonplace tomorrow will be.
yes. Now, we know that when we have student unions, and now we're not talking about Jews, just Jews. We're talking about all these, one university after the other. They're passing BDS resolutions, and the administrator of the university is overturning it. The administrator, let's say, is 65 years old. The graduate students are 25, 30 years old. In 20 years from now, they will be the administrators, right? They'll be the administrators. This will be the official policy. That's number one. Number two, we have to remember that why there's a sociological base for this flight from Jewish peoplehood. And that is that we know that 71%, 72% of non-Orthodox Jews in America are intermarrying. The intermarriage rate that was found in the last Pew study 10 years ago and in the one that just came out indicates that. Now, a Jewish identity is developing that is a universal one. And of course, a universal Jewish identity is hostile to anything that's ethnically particular. And Israel is the embodiment of Jewish peoplehood. So of course they will be hostile. Many will be hostile to Israel.
So you're saying that the intermarried couples and their offsprings, by and large, will be more hostile toward Jews as people and toward State of Israel than today.
I would say it's paradoxical. I would say that we have a situation as follows. We have a situation where the non-Orthodox streams of Judaism are becoming more universalized in order to try to bring the children of the intermarried couples into their synagogues. So on the one hand, they will be see themselves as Jewishly involved, but it will be, for many of them, it will be a Jewish identity that is stripped of a strong
sense of nationalism.
A strong connection to Jewish nationalism and Jewish particularism.
But wasn't it from the beginning? Reform movement was like this.
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's 200 years. There's nothing new about it.
Well, I mentioned in my article that the first Reformed temple, not the first, but the most important of the early ones in Germany was the Hamburg Temple, which was 1819. And what was the first change they made to the Siddur, to the liturgy, to the prayers? They took out every reference to Jewish nationhood, to Jewish chosenness, to return to Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because Germany is their country. They changed the language of the prayers from Hebrew to German. And so, yes, we have a long history. I mentioned in the article, this goes back to the beginning of the emancipation of the Jews in Western Europe, when Clermont-Tonnier, who was seemingly a friend of the Jews. I mean, he was a champion of emancipation for the Jews, meaning that they should receive equal rights in French society. He got up in the French National Assembly, in the National Assembly, and he said, we must deny everything to the Jews as a nation. We must give everything to Jews as individuals. There cannot be a nation within a nation.
Why? You disagree with this statement?
Do I disagree with this statement? Well, what he was saying was that the price for admission into French society was to give up Jewish people.
Into a French nation state society.
Yes.
Not kingdom, nation state.
That's right.
Now, but I find it reasonable, that why should, for example, French allow Germans on their territory to have national rights? I mean, they have individual rights as individuals, and they can associate according to their language or whatever else they want, but not national rights.
Well, we have to remember that there was a principle that was big 100 years ago that I wrote about in my first book called national autonomy. And for Jews, it was called Diaspora Nationalism. And that was that every group will have both individual rights and group rights. So in other words, Jews they imagined this was a vision not just of Jews like Shimon Dubnov, but it was a vision.
Was it only Jews who imagined something like this, or
No,
others too?
It was also Austrian socialists, like, of course, one of them was Jewish, Karl Renner and Otto Bauer, one of the two, I forgot.
Yeah, but among Austrian socialists, most of them were Jews, and most of them were thinking that way.
Right, but they didn't apply it to the Jews. It was Jewish nationalists who applied it to the Jews. And by the way, this was even a major component of Zionism until the interwar period, when it was clear that it couldn't be implemented. In other words, there was this notion, even for the Zionists, we'll have a state in Eretz Yisrael, but Jews who live in the diaspora will organize themselves in national communities. The state was envisioned as a federal.
What does it mean, national community in diaspora?
What it means is that the way these thinkers envisioned it, they envisioned.
You mean like Dubnov, right?
Yes, like let's take Dubnov. Okay, so Dubnov was not a socialist. Dubnov was a Russian liberal.
Right.
If he had not been a Jewish nationalist, he would have been a member of the cadets, the Liberal Party.
Constitutional Democrat.
Yes, the Constitutional Democrats. He envisioned a post-Tsarist Russia as, let's say, a federal system, that there'll be a centralized government that will take care of defense, take care of infrastructure, etc. But when it comes to cultural matters, social matters, each national group will have its own autonomy. It will have its own, let's say, parliament. It will have its own local government.
You mean like Russian Federation today under Putin?
Not really, because that's territorial. This is non-territorial, meaning you have, let's say, you have a. The problem is, let's look at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? Okay. The problem with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, according to this model, if you break it up into nation states, what's going to happen? You have Hungarians who live in Hungary, but you also have Hungarians who live in Transylvania, which is Romania. So what's going to happen to the Hungarians in Transylvania, or the Hungarians in Slovakia, right? Or the Germans in the Czech lands. So it says it doesn't matter where you live, you have autonomy. If you decide you're a member of a national group, you have schools that are paid for by the government in your language, in your national language. You have culture supported in your national language. You run your own affairs. Now,
so basically, we're talking about cultural autonomy, not political autonomy.
Mostly cultural, but some of them went as far as political, because it went. They could represent their own national interests.
So you mean like Russians in the east of Ukraine now are exercising their national autonomy in that region
Well, they're dominating now in that region, right? I mean, but
with weapons in hands, with
yeah,
rockets and tanks and everything else.
yes.
This is what you mean
Well,
by
no,
national autonomy?
this was a let's put it this way. In retrospect, we see that this was a very, shall we say, naive vision,
Mhm.
because in order to, and this is an insight that's not mine, but it's an insight of Ruth Weiss, the great scholar of Yiddish literature and a champion of Israel. Um, what you're doing is you're putting your defense in the hands of the dominant group, and in most cases your enemy, right? So this depends, the whole notion of diaspora nationalism, of national autonomy, depends on you are hoping that the government will recognize your collective rights, but the national, let's say the national majority, or the group in control, doesn't like Jews. So why would they ever agree to implement this? And so
This is, and how does she answer? How does,
no, so that's her answer. Her answer is that it's not. That's why it never worked, and that
and how would it work? I mean, separate and give each minority the right to bear arms and defend itself against central government and against their neighbors?
right. Well, according to this utopian vision, everybody would get along. Now, by the way, this is the
But
same.
I'm talking about Ruth Weiss is not utopian. She
No,
is
no.
a very hardcore realist, and
So,
I like
mhm,
99.9% of everything she says very much.
right.
But I'm
Mhm,
interested in learning from you
mhm.
her answer to this issue.
So her answer is she rejects it, and that's why she's a Zionist. That's why she says the Jews need their.
So you're telling me, that my dream
Mhm,
of living one day on Andromeda
mhm.
is just phony baloney.
It's a pipe dream. It's a pipe dream. Listen, let me tell you that look at the map of Central and Eastern Europe today. What happened? We see um, the victory of the nation state in the extreme. Why? Look at Poland in 1918 and look at Poland or let's look at Poland in 1921 and let's look at Poland in 2021. In 1921, you had a newly reborn Polish state, Polish Republic, that was 30% national minorities. Germans in Western Poland, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians in Eastern, and Jews throughout. Now, what happened?
And 10% Jews.
And 10% Jews, 10% Jews. What happened to that? Now, the Poles didn't like it. This was a perfect example. The Poles signed the Minorities Treaty, promising the Jews and the Germans and the Ukrainians national
Not
rights.
only Poles, but also Romanians and everybody else signed
They all
minority
signed it,
treaties.
and they resented it bitterly, and they used it against the Jews all the time. You Jews were the ones who forced this down our throats. Now, what happened? In the course of World War I and the immediate aftermath of World War I, the Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, right? At the end of World War II,
But I'm sorry, we were being killed
uh-huh.
in 1914.
Oh yeah, no,
1914, 1915. Hundreds of thousands of us were murdered by Russian Tsarist army.
yes, but even more were murdered in 1919 to 1921 by Ukrainian and the White Army,
By the
etc.
way, the army, Ukrainian army, headed by Petluras,
Yes,
Semyon Petlura,
yes,
he was a great advocate of Jewish autonomy,
I
of
know.
Jewish nationality. He was accused of being a Jew lover. How do you
And
like that?
there are many, um, questions historically, by the way, about Petlura. Was he really responsible for the massacres that his soldiers committed? And the consensus is that he never told them, he never gave a command, murder Jews, but he turned his back, he turned a blind eye to it, and he said, if this is what they need to do to have morale amongst the troops to kill Jews, let them.
It's not simply that he turned a blind eye. On February 15th of 1919,
Yeah.
there was a horrific pogrom, murder of Jews on Shabbat in what is now Khmelnytsky.
Yes.
And it was done by the troops named for Petlura.
Yeah.
Front-line Petlura troops.
Yes.
And when he came there, he did not punish anybody.
Right, that's right. Now, so what we see here is a perfect example of Ruth Weiss's thesis, that you don't hand your security and your rights to another group.
But in diaspora, we do not have any other choice.
Yeah. Okay. So that's why we have Israel, and that's why, and this is what our the people in Jewish studies who are signing these statements are trying to dismantle, and that is the one country in the world that protects Jews as Jews.
So what do they want? What do they want for Jews?
What they say they want is the statement stops short of saying exactly what they want, but it becomes clear when they say that Israel is a country of Jewish supremacy that must be dismantled and there has to be equality for Palestinians. They're talking about what we would call the one-state solution.
Is Italy country of Italian supremacy?
Yeah. Or France.
Is France country of French supremacy?
Exactly. This is exactly right. So what I'm trying to say is that, look at Poland, by the way, now. So Poland, 100 years later, the Jews are gone. The Germans were expelled en masse because of real and alleged Nazi collaboration. So between 12 and 15 million ethnic Germans were expelled from Eastern and Central Europe, all over at the end of the war. You don't hear, when was the last time you heard of protests in the streets for the German, the ethnic German refugees of Central and Eastern Europe? Why?
Unfortunately, we probably will live during the time when it's gonna come.
Yeah. But the bottom line is that West Germany took in all those refugees. The only group of refugees that was not taken in were the Palestinians. They were left deliberately as pawns in the war against Israel. Now, but what I wanted to say is,
you mean the Arabs of the land of Israel? When you say Palestinians, what do you mean Palestinians?
I don't want to get into too much into a very shall we say I don't want to get into a very, very explosive topic, and that is, what to call, because the bottom line is that, yes, until they didn't start calling themselves Palestinians until the 1960s, that's for sure, right? It's for sure that Jews in Palestine before 48 referred to themselves as Palestinians, right? But they, whether or not a group should be called by what they call themselves is an open question. In other words, I think it has to be the historical.
I have no problem of calling them Philistines, as they call themselves. In Hebrew, as you know, it means invaders.
Right. Now, what I want to say is that look at Poland now. Poland now is a nation state with almost virtually a homogeneous population of ethnic Poles, right? So 100 years ago,
linguistically and religiously,
linguistically, religiously, ethnically, all of the above, right?
Well, ethnically, there's a little problem because a big portion of Poles originate from one class, from Szlachta, and
Right.
another from peasantry, and those divisions still play big role in
Yes,
Poland.
yes. But putting that aside, they managed to work together to build a nation state, right? Now, what we have here is a classic double standard for Jews. What is considered, what is taken for granted to other groups, as you said, the French, the Italians, the although Italy
All nation states,
although Italy is a little bit of an exception because they have the French speakers in the north, but
where?
the very north near Switzerland,
Oh, you mean Italians
the
there?
Italians, yeah, it's a little bit of an exception, but
Yeah.
it's the exception that proves the rule. So let's say, and Poland and every country, even the Czechs and the Slovaks couldn't get together; they had to go separate. So, but when it comes to the Jews, they're not allowed to have a nation state, and it's called Jewish supremacy. Now, here's another hypocrisy. We hear today in progressive circles talk of a safe space. Uh, Groups that are considered oppressed need a safe space to be themselves, right? So you would think the Jewish progressives would look at Israel and they would say, "This is the safe space for Jews." Right? The group that experience
A safe space as long as these Palestinian Arabs do not throw rockets and bombs.
right, right, and that they would protect against that. They would protect that safe space, but instead they call it a Jewish supremacy. So you see the again.
But I see nothing wrong with Jewish supremacy. I'm sorry.
It depends what you mean by Jewish supremacy. Um,
What I mean by Jewish supremacy, it means that on the territory of the land of Israel,
Mhm.
there cannot be any other nation state other than Jewish state. That's what I mean.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. I believe that the Israeli Arabs who have full citizenship, the ones who live within the 60, within Israel, not in the territories, but within Israel, right? They have full citizenship as individuals. And
That's why you see. That's why I said that French guy who
yeah,
said, everything for Jews as individuals, nothing for Jews as a nation, was basically correct. He defined the relationship between majority and minority within a nation state.
I would say that is the only way that the nation state has ever worked.
Can work. There's nothing else. Yeah.
Why should the Jewish nation state be expected to work in a utopian way that didn't work for any other nation?
In what utopian way? Let them show some country or some part of country of any country where something of what they propose for Jews would work. The only thing works as far as they're concerned is Auschwitz for Jews.
Now let me tell you, when I have colleagues who say, I'm only for a binational state, but for
Binational?
the Jews and the Palestinians. So
Mm.
I said, what does that mean? Stop for a minute and think what that means. What it means is that the minute that there would be more Arabs than Jews in the Knesset, they would repeal the law of return. They would implement their own law of return, where they would bring the descendants of these Palestinian refugees into the land. The Jews would become a very small minority, and when Jews would be attacked on the streets, which would happen.
How many Jews live in Gaza?
Zero.
How many Jews live in Palestinian autonomy?
Right. Now, by the way, you notice that the double standard.
Where's apartheid?
Right. So
in Israel, 20% of population is Arab. Where's apartheid?
Right. And here's another factor. In the aftermath of the creation of the State of Israel, almost every Arab country expelled their Jews. 800,000 Jews became refugees and settled in the state of Israel, which accepted them, and they're thriving today. Let's say that there were the number of Palestinian Arab refugees is disputed. Let's say it was 700,000. I don't know. Let's say 700. Isn't that an equal exchange of population, right? Why is it that the Hindus and the
I do not think in those terms. Equal, not equal. This is not their land. Yes, they ended up in that land because of history, but it's not their land, and they knew it very well if they read Quran.
Now, what I want to tell you is what you realize is that these statements, anti-Israel statements by academics, are saying just the opposite. They're saying that the Palestinian Arabs are the indigenous people and that the Jews are the colonialists. Now, of course, what this is doing is it's deliberately erasing 3,000 years of history, right?
3,000 of Arab history there?
No, 3,000 years of Jewish history, of connection to the land.
Yeah, because I thought maybe you said that they say that the Palestinians lived there for 3,000 years.
Now, by the way, I want to, say if Israel decides that it's in its best interest, to at any point in the future, to leave a part of the territories and to, for whatever reasons, that's one thing, but to force Israel to do so.
But we already left territory.
Yes.
Sharon left territory to have it as a staging ground for rockets against the Israel.
Yes. And what I want to say is as follows. In my opinion, a Jew living in America, in the safety of New York or Chicago or wherever it might be.
Safety so far. We do not know if it's going to be in 5 years.
That's right. And there's been a shocking decline in physical security of Jews in the United States over the last several years.
Yeah.
And with violence coming from the far right and from the far left. Now, what I want to say is, for a Jew here to make their conscience feel better, to demand that Israel withdraw from the West Bank, when everybody knows that when they withdrew from Gaza, Gaza is a staging ground for rockets. So if they withdraw from the West Bank will be a staging ground for rockets. The country could become unlivable. Now, look what happened in 2000 to 2004, 2005, the Second Intifada, right? There were suicide, but there was a point in 2002.
But just besides issue of security,
yeah,
which you just outlined,
yeah,
there's issue of the right. This land is a God-given land to our people, period. Now, I understand that there's many people who don't believe in God, that don't believe in our God, and therefore they will contest what I just said. Well, but that was the problem from the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Now, let me just say the following, and that is that I'm a religious Jew. I believe that God promised the land to the Jews, but I will not make that argument for the right, as the right for the state of Israel to exist, simply because, as you said, the minute I say that God gave the land to the Jews, somebody could say, I don't believe you. I don't believe in God. There are many Israelis who are secular, who don't believe, right? I speak in terms of history. But
just no matter what you say, somebody will disagree with you. And in fact, when you leave this position that I just outlined, that God gave us this land, although on the surface, we end up with a better position because it's more logical, more reasonable, more fact-backed and things like this. No, we ultimately end up with a weaker position. It's like uh, for example, right now, they're doing things on Temple Mount. The last conflict started because of the Temple Mount, because of Jerusalem.
Supposedly.
Yeah.
This was an excuse because basically Hamas is a proxy for Iran. They don't do anything without getting a green light from Iran. So Iran told them to start the rockets, and they started the rockets. They used Jerusalem as an excuse. But the last thing I just want to say is that since the
but they use, what I meant to say was, they use Jerusalem because Jerusalem and Temple Mount is the issue, is the question. Who and how and on what orders is different story, and you very well may be right. But what I'm saying is that Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, look at this. No matter what we say to ourselves, we have come back to the land of Israel. Thank God, that you and I have lived to see it. Our ancestors for many, many centuries did not have this chance. I drink on Shabbat, I drink wine from Israel. Can you believe it? This is amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing to me.
Yeah.
But no matter what we say, I know that what we want, what we were brought by God there for, is to rebuild house for Him on the Temple Mount.
What I simply will say is that if you look at the record, I just looked at a new book that was published about the Oslo years and the Camp David Accords, the failed Camp David Accords in 2000. Arafat did not reject that deal from Barak based on the settlements, the reason he gave that he rejected it was because of the Temple Mount, because
there it is.
Yeah, he would not,
because that is the beginning and the end of it all.
Right.
Because who owns Temple Mount? That's who the land belongs to.
Right. And now I just want to end on one thing, and that is that in my article, I made the point that since the emancipation, since 1789, Jews have believed if only we stop being as separate, if only we speak the language of the land, if only we dress like everybody else, if only we give up kashrut, etc., the non-Jews, the non-Jewish society will accept us. But what we have to understand is that, and this is also an insight of Ruth Weiss, we cannot solve anti-Semitism because anti-Semitism is not the invention of the Jew, it's the invention of the non-Jew. The non-Jew needs anti-Semitism for his or her own psychological and political purposes. So the minute that the Jew changes something, the anti-Semite simply changes the charge against the Jews. First, the Jew was the capital. For the communists, the Jew was the capitalist. For others, the Jew was the Judeo-Bolshevik. Right? It used to be that 100 years ago, Jews were seen as cosmopolitan. Now they're seen as too nationalist. So whatever you do, you're going to lose. So therefore, stop trying to eliminate anti-Semitism and protect the Jewish people.
I agree with this absolutely. You cannot overcome anti-Semitism because it's not done because of some failure to understand things. It's done from the point of view of other people who try to define themselves, and we serve for them as the main point for their self-definition.
Right. Look at how successful, I hate to say it, but in a sense, one of my colleagues wrote to me in an email, one of my pro-Israel colleagues, that this anti-Israel statement by Jewish studies professors, it's all part of the of the Hamas plan. When they launch the rockets, they hope that Jews will turn against Israel. They hope that America, it works like a playbook.
Josh, thank you very much for your time and for this conversation. And I have to say that what I see is the only way for us to function is to strengthen our commitment to our principles, to our roots, to our beliefs, and not let it go, no matter what, even at the cost, even at the price of death, because we are right. Tzedek, tzedek tirdov. And that's what it means. It means go follow the path of truth and righteousness.
Right.
And there's no other way.
That's right. That's right.
And whoever, wants to do something bad to us, they'll do it if they can. I mean, the only reason they do not do it is because at this particular time they can't.
Right. That's right. And the other thing is, don't think that the enemy has any guilt feelings about what they did to you or what they will do to you. When I hear so many American Jews saying, but so many Palestinian civilians were killed in Gaza. Now, on the one hand, yes, any human death is a tragedy. But
I feel bad for those children. I feel bad for all those things.
Of course. But
the children were killed by their parents who launched the rockets at us.
Exactly. And don't think that the other side, if Hamas had the opportunity to kill as many civilians as they possibly could, they would sleep well at night for the rest of their lives. They would never have any guilt. And so why do we have guilt for defending ourselves? Why do we have to defend that more? It's told to us as a bad thing that less Israelis died than Palestinians. And that's because Israel protects its citizens, unlike Hamas that uses its citizens, it uses its people as cannon fodder.
Look at this right now. I know that you want to finish it, but yeah. I have to say, this new government in Israel, I do not know what's going to be happening. But this government does not produce within me a sense of good feeling and security and some certainty about the future of the state of Israel. I'm sorry.
Let's wait and see. That's what I say.
We'll wait and see. We have no other choice. We live by hope. That's why we have Hatikva. In any case, just thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for bringing up this issue of the academicians, turning against our people, and hopefully those academicians that are doing it, if they watch this conversation, they will recognize themselves, but probably not.
I hope that it would be the case. Anyway, but the rest of us will continue to fight. That's the point.
And we need to keep on fighting, and we need to keep on talking, and we need to keep on supporting each other, and we need to support what we stand for.
That's right. Absolutely. Yes. Okay.
Anyway, as they say in China, thank you very much, and sei gesund.
Sei gesund und stark.
You see, you're from Western Russia. I'm from Ukraine.
I'm a Litvak.
You're a Litvak. Nice talking to you.
Bye. Okay, bye-bye.